Hi, welcome to my channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. As I've explained in a recent video, China has turned the page and is now progressing on a new path forward. And in this video, I'm going to discuss what they are doing. So if you are interested, please continue watching. Hi, welcome back. I recently made a video regarding China, and it is very similar to Putin's speech in February, which clearly says, well, it indicated or subliminal, English word, in an indirect way, that Russia has decided that's it. A red line was crossed by the West. Russia is not going to wait or depend on the West anymore. They are now going ahead with a new multipolar polar world. And Russia has started to build up the relationship with basically the South, China, and the rest of the world that doesn't support the West anymore. In a similar manner, China was always cautious and tried to be diplomatic. And when they expressed their opinion, it was always reserved. But recently, they released two papers. And the one paper basically said it in direct words what China believed the US was, and the dangers of the US, and etc., etc. So that was also, if I use the word correctly, sublime way of telling America, that's it, red line was crossed. And we had recently seen a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, brokered by China in Beijing, and it was a huge event. I didn't really talk about this because there were numerous other videos that talked about it. But if one thinks a little bit back, Saudi Arabia was a big ally of America and facilitated the creation of the petrodollar. And in exchange, basically, America supplied a lot of arms to Saudi Arabia. Why Saudi Arabia ever needed these weapons, I'm not totally sure, because if you look at the Saudi Arabia-Yemen war, then it's not the Saudi and Arabian people themselves that do the fighting. It's usually either contract soldiers or some other form of limited participation. Maybe the pilots were all Saudi Arabia, but they have no risk of being shot down, etc., etc. And they also, Saudi Arabia built up a relationship with Israel, and therefore they supported the Syrian war that goes with that. So you could say they were excellent partners or a vassal state for America itself. They also controlled most of the UAE and the other smaller countries around them, and made them basically part of or subject of their attitudes towards America. But in any case, as far as I understand, is that the relationship soured between Saudi Arabia and Iran about 8 years ago, when Saudi Arabia decided to execute a prominent Shia cleric. And Iran was basically against that and shouldn't be executed. And then diplomatic relations were severed between the two countries. Now, for me, yes, the execution is bad, but we don't really understand their culture, so it is difficult for us Western people to really understand the reasons and arguments behind that, because we are not Muslims and we are not Arabs. But let's say it was warranted. Then breaking off diplomatic relationship with that was a fairly small thing. So I would believe that there was something much more behind it. Well, at the end of the day, China has built up their relationship with Saudi Arabia to the point where China pays in yuan for oil. They have now made peace, or at least some diplomatic relationships between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this is a big blow for the Americans itself. Now, that is just more or less the background to the whole affair after these two papers were published by the Chinese, when the new leaf was turned over. Now the news came out that Xi Jinping was planning on going to Moscow and then to Europe, but his itinerary wasn't made available. So at this stage, we don't know what countries he's going to visit, but we do know he's going to go to Moscow. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it seems to me the general idea is going to happen within the next few weeks, maybe a week or so, maybe more. And then Xi Jinping and Putin are going to have a nice chat. And at this stage, we don't know what they're talking. Well, we never know what they talk, except what they later release in the press release. But there is some credible information that Xi Jinping will talk to Zelensky via a video conference. Now, that in itself is also a major step forward. You can put it basically above the reconciliation between agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China has made a peace plan available. That was one paper, and the other one was basically telling the Americans straight what they are and what the problem is. And this is you can see that the Chinese are now on the peace path, if you want to call it. They're going to go to Europe. They will probably visit Germany. He will probably visit Germany, and then France, and the rest of the countries I don't know. But those are probably on his itinerary, minimum. And then he will talk about this whole anti-China attitude of the West, especially Europe, and that Europe should be well aware of the integration of the two economies, and that it wouldn't be so easy to basically sanction China, because that will, in effect, at the end of the day, lead to the collapse of Europe itself. So what I believe is China is now on a peace path to counter the influence of America on Europe, break the stalemate of Europe being a vassal bloc to America, break the stupidity of and convince the Europeans, especially Germany, to reverse their stance against Russia, not go on a path against China, and tell them that if they want to commit suicide, then that is the path they would have to follow. But there is a way out, and that is the way of peace and cooperation and being part of the multipolar world. So I think this is a serious effort from China to counter the American influence in Europe. And I believe we will see a lot of, hopefully, changes after this visit. Maybe not immediately, but a slowly realization from the European leaders that you cannot sanction China and Russia together, but let's only sanction China alone. Europe cannot afford to do it because it is one of Germany's biggest export market, number one. China is also the biggest producer of solar panels and renewable energy. And if the Greens in Germany are so focused on cutting themselves off from gas and trying to change to renewable energy and solar in that respect, then how can they even think about sanctioning China? Because that is what they will need. They need the solar panels from China. There is no other real source. Even most of the American solar panels are manufactured in China itself. So that deal then goes, or that ambition then goes out of the window, flies out of the window. And then we're not talking about all the other stuff that comes from those regions. And then they will also tell Europe that the Americans are trying to create a pivot to Asia. Well, they have already done that, but they're going to increase them. There might be a proxy, they have threatened that there might be war between China and America in the near future. Actually, both parties have said that. So there's a real danger that there might be breakout war between China and America in the East. And if NATO wants to support and maintain their NATO agreement, then they will have to commit and help America in that war. And then China will tell them, but you're way too far away, number one. And number two is you don't have the military capability. Number three is you have a present war in Europe between Ukraine and Russia. And basically, it's a lost cause. It's a lost cause for the Americans as well. Really. Taiwan, Japan, those are all islands. Concentrated populations, high density populations, high density of targets, military. There's no place for storing a lot of military ammunition and depots and equipment because it's too small. You can't hide them. So they will be destroyed quite easily. And because they are island, well, what led to the Second World War between America and Japan? It was the oil embargo. So go and do a naval blockade of those two islands, and then there's no fuel. And then we can see what will happen again. So from that point of view, there is no win situation for the US. And there is no benefit from Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan to get even involved and support America in that type of venture, because it's a lost cause from the start, just as the Ukrainian-Russian war is a lost cause for the Ukrainians from the start. And then we talk, I mentioned in the previous video, I watched this video of Scott Ritter. He talked a little bit about that. And again, I have nothing against that video. Actually, I wanted to comment on that. And that is that I fully agree with this. Well, not fully agree, but if you want to speculate, like my other friends usually always do, the war's not going well in Ukraine for the Ukrainians. I will make a separate video about that as well, but of course it is impossible for Ukraine to win the war against Russia. Anybody that argues differently is living in a fantasy world. It is Goliath, David versus Goliath, and there is no miracle stone that can hit Goliath between the eyes. There is no such thing. The only thing that they can do is try to prolong the war as much as possible and inflict as much cost onto the Russians than what is possible. But not even that is happening, because they don't have the same amount of armament. They don't have the same artillery quantity, armor quantity, aviation, air defense systems. There's nothing that they can use to basically really inflict a lot of damage. It's the Russians that make the Ukrainians pay dearly for their counteroffensive. So the speculations came from Scott Ritter that he said, yes, Xi Jinping might go to, or not might, talk to Zelensky and say, listen, Zelensky, I know how you feel. I know you think you have the support of the Americans, and they will indefinitely support you, but you are wrong. If you look at Afghanistan, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at all the places where America was involved, they have no qualms of abandoning you. There's already talk that the Americans don't want to support Ukraine anymore. There's already sort of rumors coming out that people want to talk peace and so on. How credible those things? I don't think they are that much credible because it's always different sources. It's like retired generals somewhere in the middle of nowhere and a politician somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and they're not involved in the decision-making process itself. So I don't have much that faith in those type of peace talks. But there you get a feeling that there is some undertone going to happen. And because it's a foregone conclusion, Ukraine cannot win Russia on a military battlefield. Ukraine will be destroyed, and it only depends on how much will be destroyed, how many men will die, and how much territory the Russians will take at the end of the day. So Xi Jinping might tell Zelensky, you are fighting a losing battle. You are depending on people that will abandon you just like that, and because they have the reputation for that. And then what then? Then you have lost all your life, and if you don't become, and if the Russians believe you are have no worth for them, then you can say goodbye and you will be killed. So if you continue with this operation and not start to talk, then that is the end of your life, the end of Ukraine, and the end of a lot of lives of your citizens and destruction of your country. And then the ball is in Zelensky's court. The problem that I have actually with Zelensky is the narrative, the common narrative, which is actually contradictory. The first one is, he's supposed to be an actor. And as an actor, he is supposed to be a pawn of the Americans. He has no real political skills in any case. So, is he a puppet? Because on the other side, then, he's this political leader. He's this Churchill. He's this, strong man that can stand up against Russia. Well, make up your mind. Is he a comedian or is he a strong leader, politician? And this is what the narrative I don't understand. For me, he's a comedian. He's basically controlled by the nationalistic arm of his government. He's threatened, but he's willing to go along because he's probably being bribed as well. And he plays the role that he's doing. But whether he has an authoritative final decision in matters of war or politics, I'm not totally, I don't have much confidence in that. Well, if he refuses, then the war will go on. The Chinese have predicted their military college, the military college, whatever, have predicted that the Russian conflict will be ended by the end of September. There are other talks that it will also end by the end of summer. I don't fully agree with that. These type of wars don't stop that one. What I would believe is that there will be some more attritional battles until the Russians decide that they, with very little risk, they will break the lines, offensive lines, and then they will drive the Ukrainian army forces back until on the other side of the Dnieper River. And then Russia might start to clean up behind them and maybe take Nikolaev or Odessa itself and so on. Although that is not the intention, but at the end of the day, that might be the necessary front line that has to be created in order to ensure peace. If you cannot demilitarize Ukraine, then you have to make Ukraine as small as possible so that it cannot afford any military adventures and doesn't have the money or doesn't have resources. Basically driving him back as far as possible to the west without endangering himself, staying in the areas which are pro-Russians, and slowly build up those areas and then regain the citizens of Ukraine in that area as becoming pro-Russians and opening their eyes to what their government has done with them. So this is basically how I see it. I think also, you know, the Western is trying to force the Ukrainians into a counteroffensive and show some results, but in order for Ukraine to do that, they need ammunition and armor and so on, and the West not giving it, so it's a catch-22. Which one is first, the egg or the chicken? Am I first going to make progress, then you give me the weapons that I don't need at that stage, or you're going to get a weapon and then I have a successful counteroffensive? Maybe. But my chances are much better than that. Maybe that is the reason why Zelensky or his controllers are putting so much effort into the Bakhmut defense, or the defense of Bakhmut and that area. Because they firstly know they don't have the necessary hardware to really start a counteroffensive, so might as well use your armor and so on that you have now and defend Bakhmut as much best as possible and to ensure that the Russians don't break through and advance more to the west, which would be fatal for the Ukrainians or whatever. But I'm quite curious what is the outcome was going to be of Xi Jinping's visit to Europe and his talk with Zelensky. And I think they will try to make each their best effort to convince him it's a futile war. It's not in their best interest. There are other options available that are much more attractive. And, you know, like Scotland said, China might even promise to help rebuild Ukraine financially and physically. So maybe they can sweeten the deal quite good, because at the end of the day, China sweetened the deal and the Americans threaten to destroy you. So at the end of the day, now you've got two options. Which one is the best for you? So that's my story for today then. If you haven't, subscribe, tell your friends, press the notification bell, leave a comment, and until next time then, cheers.